Hello and welcome to the Social Workers Rise podcast. It is your host, Catherine, here. Today, we're going to be talking about the top do's and don'ts for social media. So, if you are a social worker and you are maybe entering into social media, you're wondering, hey, I really want to help people, but I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to get sued. I don't want my license to be at risk. Here is the episode for you. We have a guest who specializes in this because I will be honest, I don't know much about this either. We're going to learn together. We're with Jennifer Flynn, CPHRM. She is the Vice President of Risk Management for Healthcare Providers Service Organization, also known as HPSO. You might recognize that from our ad if you are a listener to Social Workers' Rights podcast. So this is of Anon's Affinity Insurance Services. They're specializing in risk management, and she's worked in healthcare insurance business for over 21 years. So she is not a newbie around here. She knows what she's talking about. And she's actually dedicated her career to educating healthcare professionals on professional liability risks. And she's here to give us some strategies to really help us reduce those risks by supporting patient safety principles and developing quality management programs. So even if you are here and trying to figure out how do we make sure that we are developing good programs here more on a macro level, she is your go-to person as well. She's also a published author on various risk management topics. Jennifer is a certified professional in healthcare risk management and is a licensed property and casualty agent. She earned her BA from psychology from Arcadia University in Pennsylvania. You are a busy person, Jennifer. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm so happy for the opportunity to speak to our social worker community out there.
Yes, I'm so grateful, excited to have you here because in a world of social media, and it's kind of inevitable that social media and professionalism really intertwine, especially if we're trying to help people online and or if we're trying to just market our services too and just kind of explain like, hey, this is therapy, this is what we do. There's so many gray areas. So I'm glad that you are here to share your experiences with us. Before we hop into that, I'd like to hear a little bit from you around like who you are and what you do. I read your bio, but I always like to hear it from the person themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, many folks probably know HPSO as providers of professional liability insurance, but my role there as risk manager is a little bit different. It's really about risk education and educating our providers on not just the malpractice risks that they might face, but their professional risks, even at on their license level. And so, with that, I get to look through some of the claim files affecting social workers. I get trying to understand the drivers of that claims and more specifically the what failed and why in those scenarios. Was it a breakdown in communication? Was it a clinical misstep? Can it be remedied by teaching, by training, by continuing education courses? But really, through all of that, the education that we put out in the HPSO program is meant to not just reduce the likelihood of something like this happening in your professional careers, but to increase your great risk control habits, to increase your patient and client safety measures so that you have great, consistent outcomes across the board and that your clients are satisfied. Yes.
Yes, yes, love that. And we want to protect the integrity and the ethics of the clients too, protect their privacy and just help them feel safe, especially if they do find us online. It's like, oh, this therapist is online, or they could be sharing all my business with thousands of people. So yeah, it helps to build that rapport too. So I'm wondering from your perspective, what are the top social media like do's and don'ts for social workers. I'm hoping that we can just kind of have a conversation and kind of go back and forth as far as what we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So social media is definitely a great tool for, putting yourself out there, as a thought leader in the community, sharing great information with those who might be looking at your profile on, the things that you're an expert in. But in terms of social media and where we see challenges and pitfalls for healthcare providers, like social workers, it is really around keeping boundaries, keeping confidentiality, having a professional attitude. So, not making derogatory remarks and not, imposing your values on the community that you're serving. And so, those areas are really top areas where we see matters and allegations asserted against social workers. But when we look at some of the top 10 do's and don'ts, it really comes down to social workers, one being knowing and understanding their code of ethics. NASW puts out the code of ethics, which we encourage folks to review and understand at least on an annual basis because it is quite robust. There are a lot of sections in the code. It really drills down into the do's and don'ts of what you should be doing with your clients to maintain ethical competencies. And so that's a great first step for folks to be involved and educate yourselves on what you should or should not be doing. And that applies to social media. Um, we always say that if you wouldn't put it in the record, meaning document it in the record, then it probably shouldn't be going on social media either. So that actually takes a little bit of a dive into not just maintaining confidential information, but as I mentioned, keeping boundaries. So being very careful about friending clients, family members of clients, not giving uh, therapy or using your social worker license in any sort of way that that purports to that you're giving therapy online to a particular client or customer, that you want to think of it as you're educating maybe the community, you're adding value because of the education and experience that you have, but you're not doing anything that would break that professional boundary of code of ethics with your clients. When we talk about maintaining confidentiality, which we really see as a number one issue, it is a lot of folks don't realize that, you know, there are probably two main avenues that clients have to bring against social workers. One might be a malpractice lawsuit. And so that's a civil lawsuit where there's a high bar there to prove these allegations against you, that there was some harm that came to your client by way of your actions or failure to act. And because of that harm, they're seeking a monetary compensation. But what we're more likely to see, especially in using social media, is a client bringing a complaint to your state or regulatory board. And so these are more administrative matters. The regulatory and state boards, many social workers might not realize, are there to protect the public. They not only promulgate the rules and regulations of the profession and issue licenses to those who've met the requirements in the state, but they also are tasked with bringing discipline against those licensees for unprofessional or unethical conduct. And the bar isn't quite as high as it is with a malpractice lawsuit. In many states, the threshold for the board either bringing sanctions against your license or not and making that decision is really around the preponderance of evidence. And so with social media in particular, there's a digital trail of everything that you're doing there. There's a timestamp, there are all the posts that are kept. And that's the evidence that a client might use if they feel that you shared information without permission, if you defamed them in some way, if you crossed boundaries. And, when we look into these boundary violations, because I just do want to touch upon this really quickly. Boundary violations, when we look at these across the board in terms of commonalities, how did these matters get to this point of crossing boundaries? When the board looks at it, they look at some other instances of unethical or unprofessional conduct as sort of unintentional. But boundary crossings and crossing that line where you as the professional should be recognizing that phenomenon that happens of those boundary crossings that then turn into violations. It is not just your responsibility to recognize and sort of right the ship, get it back to a therapeutic professional relationship, but the common instances that we see for some of these matters is that, when we think about boundary crossings, it might be behavior that it may seem harmless in nature, but you we've heard providers disguise it as they thought they were meeting the needs of the client. So accommodating the client with special conveniences that you're not making available to other clients. That might be, you might give them a ride somewhere. You're sharing more personal information with them than what you would otherwise do with clients. You're taking sort of the tasks beyond the job description to delivering something to them that you're not doing for other clients. And that could be not even just accommodating, but reducing your fees or billing them outside of what you would normally do. So that's where we think it starts off as a harmless thing, that crossing, but it can quickly move into a boundary violation. And so more examples of this would be, um, furthering your agenda as opposed to the meeting the needs of your client. And that could be connecting on social media, and where we see this boundary violation happening, it is that you're connecting on non-clinical matters or purposes. We've seen instances where social workers have friended, their client, and then all of a sudden they're going to the movies together, or they are taking an exercise class together, or, texting and sharing information via, again, a digital tracking that then becomes discoverable if in fact it leads to some harm, or complaints of unprofessional or unethical practice. So this socializing outside of the clinical setting is definitely moving into boundary violation. We have seen instances of entering a business relationship with your client, which then, if you think about the pathway to that, it's not just that it's a crossing or a violation to start that relationship, but when the relationship then sours, the client is left feeling abandoned or left feeling like, what happened here? And that brings up emotion, that brings up anger in some cases, and that really drives them. That's the impetus for them bringing these complaints to the state board in the first place.
We're going to pause here to take a quick listen to a word from our sponsors. Hey, social workers, are you looking for clinical supervision or hoping to offer it? Check out Rise Directory. It's the national hub connecting associate social workers with licensed clinical supervisors, making it super easy to find your right match in your state. Head over to risedirectory.com and see how it can help you grow in your career. You know, a lot of social workers think their employer's insurance has them covered. But here's the thing, that policy is really there to protect the organization, not you. That's why I always recommend having your own coverage with a trusted organization such as HPSO. Their professional liability insurance is designed for social workers and it follows you wherever you work. It's peace of mind you just can't put a price on. Check them out at hpso.com/swrise.
And then, of course, we have sort of a third category of actual misconduct and abuse. And, again, the courts and the boards look at this as an intentional act that's outside of the therapeutic relationship. So, sexual or romantic conduct, um, treatment in exchange for sexual favors, or even making explicit and disturbing jokes or images, sharing images with them. And so we have to recognize sometimes when these situations are moving out of that therapeutic relationship boundary, and that there could be great consequences to this. Um, the board, with their mission to protect the public, can and do enact sanctions on a licensee that can be something as benign as a license, maybe a fine, or saying you need more continuing education. Um, the board gives you the opportunity with something that's not as severe of a sanction. The board is signaling to you, we're giving the opportunity to change your behavior so that you don't see us back in the future, taking that a little bit further. But where we do see more severe board sanctions is when the board says this behavior is egregious, and they can, in fact, either suspend or revoke or put your license on probation, which in essence could either limit or end a social worker's career. And that could be very devastating for the provider.
Yes, I imagine so. Oh my gosh. You just make me cringe the whole time. Like, oh, this sounds terrible. Like a bad idea. So I heard, let me see if I understand. I heard three main categories. One is to just know and follow the code of ethics, which that in itself is massive. It covers kind of everything that we talked about, right? So know and follow the code of ethics, even online. The second area is just paying attention to boundaries. Try not to be violating any boundaries, keeping it very clear that, hey, I am the social worker, I am the therapist. This is our role working together, and that is it. And the third part is the misconduct and abuse. So just kind of like not acting appropriately, pursuing sexual relationships, dating relationships is a no-go. Um, I'm hearing out of all of these kind of an overarching theme is the power dynamic, is to recognize that social workers and therapists do have a power dynamic in these relationships, that we kind
Absolutely.
of hold the power, and we're working with, considering vulnerable populations. They're coming to us because they have a problem and because we are the professional, and it is up to us to be setting the boundaries, to be acting ethically, and to know what is inside our scope and what is outside the scope.
That's absolutely we should connect more on these matters because you very succinctly said that. That's absolutely the crux of the do's and don'ts here. It is that the courts and the boards look at you with all of your experience and that you hold a professional license as the expert here, as having the knowledge, and with that knowledge that you are communicating with your clients in a professional manner. So when we talk about social media and that, it is not posting when you're feeling emotional, never sharing confidential information, not accepting requests from your clients, friend requests. But the do's are post with education, post with value, thinking before you're posting. Is this imposing my values on someone else? And again, that understanding the code of ethics as you're applying this. But you made a great point that when you have all the power because of that education and experience, and that if you look at that as being the main communicator for your clients, building that rapport, it's also that you're managing their expectations. And so that sometimes requires you to have difficult conversations or emotionally charged conversations, or to say to them right at the start of your relationship, these are the things that we are going to achieve together, but there are limitations to this. And let me explain to you what they are so that both parties are going in eyes wide open as to what the therapeutic relationship can or cannot do for them. A lot of times, as you mentioned, and I think it's a great word, you're working with populations that have been described as compromised or at risk. And what that translates to in these professional liability matters is that you should be taking great care with this patient population that is already fragile. And there's a emotion behind this because these matters often include, you know, custody disputes, or that you're working with children, that you're a mandated reporter. And so there are tough situations that social workers are in today. Um, and so, educating yourself on what you should be doing under the standards and scope of your license in your state.
Yes. And this is a great place to start. I love that you brought these topics up. And ultimately, my thought was, okay, if you don't want this public, this conversation, this DM, this comment, if you don't want this public shown to all of your clients, all of your colleagues, all of the courtroom, don't do it. It's probably not a good idea. It's like that old saying, like, what is it? If you don't want what you're doing plastered on the front page of the newspaper, then don't do it.
Exactly, right? We call it the smell test. If almost like if it doesn't seem right, then you should probably think twice about it. Because
Yes.
I will say this too, one of the other things that we see in social media that's kind of a phenomenon is we have these super sleuths who spend their time investing in, looking at the background and education and experience of
Good.
folks who've said they've earned such and such a degree, that clinical social work degree, that they have this many years of experience. If you're calling yourself, which I don't recommend to do, but if you're calling yourself an expert working with a certain patient population, that's now raising the bar on the expectations that the community has for you. And so if you haven't earned that degree or earned that specialization, you should really not be putting yourself out there in that way, especially on social media, because that could lead to lawsuits and matters of misrepresenting your qualifications.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And I know this has been a big issue. It's May, and there was recently this this quote doctor that isn't actually a doctor, but she was pretending to be a doctor in mental health. And it was a whole thing. And I'm like, woo. So it just reminds me of the differences between being a licensed, educated professional versus being a life coach or some other uncertified professional, that we are governed by these boards and we do have extra ethical standards and obligations that we need to adhere to. And that's what sets us apart and creates this level of professionalism that people without it just may not have, or they're not held to the same standards. And I remember seeing this post. It was from someone who owned an organization that services a certain population, and we'll just leave it at that. But they went on and were talking bad about this population and saying that they're lazy
Right.
and that they're just doing all these bad things. And I'm like, you, this is literally your organization. Like, you do this for a living. How are you talking bad? And as me, I don't even know them, but I don't want to know them if that's how they feel about the
Yeah.
people that they serve. So it really impacts reputation and your trust too.
And I think that that goes back to not posting when you're feeling emotional or thinking before you're posting, because that post, while it may be deleted, the digital footprint is that it's there forever. It will be found somewhere. And yeah, it as far as your reputation, that's where you're trying to build that rapport with your client base. And your reputation is going to it's everything in that relationship for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking when sometimes I'll do day in the life of a social worker, and I'm very careful not to even talk about what I talked about that day, because I don't want a client, my account's not for clients, but I don't want them happen to have found my account and say, oh, yeah, her and I talked about building trust and friendships, and she's talking about me right now. And even if it is true and honest and respectful, I don't want clients to think that I'm using their conversations, our work, as a ploy to get social media followers, so I will keep it
Right.
very vague and say, I met with 10 clients, I did 5 phone calls, I met with staff, but I'm very careful not to share specifics, even the topics, like forget about names or locations or anything like that. So it can be done, but I just like just keeping it very high level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you
We
so much.
definitely. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you so much. Was there anything that you feel like you wanted to add that we haven't touched on yet?
Um, when I would just probably leave with folks with, you know, a couple good things to keep in mind when you are on social media, and even if you are unaware if this crosses the line or doesn't, there are resources to look into yourself to answer those questions for you. So you can reach out to your national association, you can reach out to colleagues in your network. When we talk about standard of care and meeting the standard, it's really what are other providers that are same minded, having same situations, if they're making the same decisions that you would have done. And that's how you're judging these cases. Would another reasonably prudent provider have made the same decisions given the same situation? And so having that great network that you can, have in terms of reaching out for assistance or collaboration, um, but also keeping up with the trends of the industry, knowing what's in scope or out of scope, as you mentioned, and then, reaching out to resources if you have questions. And that includes HPSO if you have questions about what your insurance covers, or if you need any more resources that can be helpful that are found on our website, articles or cases or things like that.
Great. Yes. One other resource is your clinical supervisor or professors. If you have questions, they're great people to run this by. I am curious, Jennifer, how does insurance like HPSO actually protect social workers?
Yeah. So, when folks purchase a liability policy through us, it's usually to protect them from these high value uh, verdicts or judgments or settlements that are through the malpractice limit, that $1 million per claim limit that they have, that protection. And what folks probably don't realize is that the liability coverage is meant to cover them for the cost of being sued for malpractice. So it is the defense costs. And if negligence is proven, it's also the indemnity payment or the payment made to the injured party in the settlement or judgment of that case up to the limits that they have on their policy. But what they also don't realize is that there are many um, sub coverages under that professional liability limit. And one of them includes reimbursement for the defense of these state board matters. There's a sub limit to that. It is not the $1 million, but is a $25,000 sub limit. But if you find yourself defending against a complaint to your state board and you call us to trigger that coverage, that can be helpful. These state board matters are not informal matters. We always recommend having an attorney there alongside you to help not just navigate the requests from the board so that you're in compliance with that, but doing so in a way that keeps confidentiality and keeps you safe as well as you're, navigating that case. Um, but there's also another great coverage, which is preparing social workers for perhaps a deposition that they might receive or responding to a subpoena. So we know social workers receive subpoenas all the time, writing letters to the courts in custody disputes and the like. And so the coverage, the HPSO coverage, can help with helping you either prepare for a deposition where maybe you're not the named person, but you're there as a witness giving under oath testimony, or even responding to those subpoena matters in a way that protects you from further legal wranglings should you not be in compliance with that. So I recommend people going onto our website and they can see a list of all the great coverages that are under that liability coverage. It can be quite helpful navigating in today's ever-changing healthcare environment. A lot of times it really comes down to when things change with accepted guidelines or laws change in your state or your employer changes a policy and procedure, it creates, at least in a short term, some confusion. Well, I was doing this yesterday, but now I have to do it differently today. And the coverage is there just as a protection so that even if the allegations against you turn out to be meritless or groundless, they still need to have a defense built for them to have that successful outcome, to have not a indemnity payment or not a matter go on to become something more legally for you. And so I think just having the protection there as peace of mind is probably the number one reason why we hear social workers touting the value that they see for the liability policy.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Because I have seen so many times where people just make outrageous claims like they're not true. But here they are, here the therapists are as just normal people. We don't have a whole lot of money, but now they have to scramble to find a way to defend themselves against something that's just not true. And this has happened more times than I wish to like acknowledge, and it's so sad. But yes, it's so important to have that coverage because like you said, the boards are there to protect the public. The agencies are there to protect themselves. And who do we have? We have to have someone that's there also protecting us. And I think too it just kind of goes back to knowing our limits and knowing when we're outside of those limits. And for legal matters, I know for myself, totally outside of like, I know zero. And so I am happy to have that insurance there just as a way to make sure that I have people that are on my side that I can call and say, hey, this happened. What do I do?
Yeah. I would say the number one thing that social workers can do today, if above anything else, is really be very clear on your documentation. Document consistently, document contemporaneously, meaning happening at the time of care, document objectively, and document in a professional manner. And that's going to help build that defense for any matter that comes against you. You've probably heard the old adage, not documented, not done. But in today's day and age, it can't be more true that when there aren't adequate records, when there isn't the quality of the record is not great, it really hinders the defense that we can build for that matter. So one thing, if there's one takeaway here today, it is documentation is a key factor in all of these matters. And so having great documentation habits is a great first step to building a good risk control program.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And listener, if you are thinking, oh, shoot, I don't know about documentation, I have a whole course that I did on this. It covers a proper assessment, documentation, planning clinical interventions, treatment planning and termination, everything that you need to know from start to end with a client. So no worries. There are resources for that. But
Right.
thank you so much, Jennifer. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. I have a whole page of notes that I took. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for having me.